The ship under the mountain remembered our names before we spoke. I was Mara Ellison, envoy commander of the Coast of Law, and my shuttle smelled like old resin and ozone. We were dropping into the Obsidian Anchorage, a hollowed asteroid whose walls showed old scoring from rail drills. Beyond the blister canopy, miners' lamps made constellations in a darkness that tasted like copper on the tongue. Our mission was to verify a rumor no court trusted, but none could ignore. A relic human saintship slept inside the rock. "You see it?" Lieutenant Haru asked, eyes flicking across LiDAR. The scope whispered back a geometry unlike quarry lathes or cargo ribs, arcs interlocked with ribs, ribs braided with truss, truss veiled beneath a woven lattice. It was not built to hold ore. It was built to hold oath. "Dock us to their power umbilical," I said. The miner cooperative had strung a lifeline from their sputtering reactor bank to the buried hull's skin. Around it, scavenger skiffs and shrine barges held station like gulls worrying a whale. The anchorage's administrator swore neutrality. The toll authority swore ownership by salvage law. And a cult that called itself the Ledger Choir swore spiritual custody because they had sung to the hull for 9 months and counted the echoes. "We didn't come to break seals, we came to read them." The docking collar kissed the cooperative ring with a groan you felt in your molars. Our fleet mind came aboard in a hush static scent, a faint downshift in the cabin hum, then resolved as a woman's voice with a scholar's patience. Archivist 9 online. "Hello, Mara." "Hello, 9," I said, and felt the crew relax by degrees. You could trust a fleet mind who introduced herself as if stepping into someone else's library gently. Palms open. The Anchorage airlock opened to heat and bad coffee. Miners pressed in with their rough suits. Watching our small escort of Marines, like the Marines, were the ones who might break something holy. Administrator Sal swung forward through the knot and offered a hand. "We kept them off it best we could," she said. "But people bring teeth when they smell old gold." "I smell an injunction," Haru murmured on private. "File it after we see the hull." I replied, "If it is what they say, precedent will write itself." We threaded scaffold corridors that rang like bells underfoot. The Anchorage's skin sweated and the air tasted mineral, breath hot in your mask until the temperature shed in a sudden draft. Ahead, the tunnel opened into a cavern full of work lights and prayer flags, the flags torn from shipping nets and printed with bargain oaths. In the middle lay a shape so black it ate the light and returned it in a precise blue lace. The hull's sigil 3 chevrons nested around a scale sat beneath a skin of vitrified carbon like a thumbprint beneath glass. "Saint Ship," someone whispered behind me. The word felt heavy, as if the mouth should feed it coins. "Not a saint," Archivist 9 said through my mastoid. "A registry class, later called a saint by colonies who forgot their own filings. The pattern's older. It remembers debts. We win here by teaching the room what it already owes." Haru checked our perimeter and tilted his head toward a cluster of uniforms at the far scaffold. The toll authority stood there in trim blue, gold pins bright as a fresh bribe. Their captain lifted a speaker. "Coast of Law vessel," he said. "You are on salvage ground. Stand down your interventions. Cede inspection to us, and sign receipt of our claim. Administrator Saul," I called without turning. "Your station registry, please." She handed me a pad. The cooperative's ledger glitched at the edges, but its heart was clean notice of discovery. Broadcast to 3 jurisdictions. Counter notice received from authority and from the Ledger Choir. No binding court assigned. I put the pad where the authority could see it and raised my voice until it carried to prayer flags. By law of first notice and mutual contest, I said, no party may act to alter, disassemble, or endanger this object until responsibility is determined. To break a seal before a proper hearing is to declare war on your own receipts. Administrator Saul's people looked relieved. The authority captain looked annoyed. The cultists didn't blink at all. One of them, a woman with lamp black on her cheeks, pressed her palms to the hull's skin and whispered in a cadence like counting. Archivist, I asked. The hull is powered but latent. 9 said. It registers our presence. It is not asleep. It is listening the way a judge listens when she knows the answer already. What answers exactly? Haru asked under his breath. The ones we don't want to hear, 9 said, and there was a wryness in it that kept me from flinching. The cooperative brought us to the seal, a vein of glassy material where the sigil nested deeper, the triangles tightening toward a point as if designed to measure intention. Its edges sang when you breathed near them. I set my palm millimeters from it and felt heat that wasn't heat, but attention. The cultist stopped counting. It will open to the worthy, she said. Worthy of what I asked. She smiled. Remembrance. Remembrance is not worship, I said. It is accounting. Sheets of history cut sharper when you realize their receipts. We prepared a rite, not salt and smoke, not a torch against a tomb. The Coast of Law practiced openings the old way definitions, declarations, and an offer to be bound by what we awoke. Haru drilled our Marine 4, whose boots clanged steady on the scaffold as citizens gathered. Administrator Sale broadcast the proceedings on the station feed. And in the noise, I heard civilian life as a counterpoint to our edges, a child whining about helmet straps, a cook arguing with a supplier, a technician whispering to her lover that she would be off shift by dawn. 9 threaded my ear with reference the sigil matches Registry Margin Class 2, adjudicated in the era of the Second Consilience. Devices of this class accept keys comprised of rights assertions, not physical tokens. They open for claims backed by proofs, not force. So we argue our way in, I said. We teach our way in. 9 replied, and allow ourselves the chance to be wrong. The authority captain rolled his shoulders as if we bored him. This ritual is theater, what he said. We have thermal cutters. If you cut, and it wakes, we will have bodies to count by noon. Administrator Saul said flatly, your men can clean them up. The ritual began with air silence. When 1,000 people shut up at once, pressure changes. My tongue tasted iron. My heart ticked a heavier rhythm in my throat. Our council, Petrov, lifted a slate and spoke into the mic. We, acting under the Coast of Law by charter of 3 free polities and 1 interstice, assert a right to inspect, to catalog, and to publish the true nature of this object. We accept the cost of publishing what injures our own case, and we bind ourselves to repair harms we cause by our inspection. From the cult, Lamp Black Woman, we, the Ledger Choir of the Anchorage, assert a right to witness, to sing archives true, and to deny false songs. We accept correction and bind ourselves to the austerity of number when number contradicts fervor. From the authority captain we, toll authority, assert a right of salvage, taxation, and custodial force under emergency ordinance. We commit to safety and to custody of value for the greater good of the line. Translate, I murmured. They'll sell it and call it mercy. Haru said, The glass vein near the sigil brightened a shade of not blue, more like a subtraction from black that made my eyes ache. 9 breathed in my ear like someone counting figures. Keys accepted, now she said, but not complete. What completes them, I asked. Debt. We will be measured by the bills we pay, not the songs we sing. I stepped to the mic. We offer ledger, I said, and the word made some in the crowd make the old coin gesture at their throats. Not the ledger you imagine in your favor, nor the one you fear in mine. We offer the ledger of harms this act will cause. Published now and paid now, before the seal opens one finger. Saul swallowed. Paid now, she whispered. If it is real, it will flood this rock with heat when its arrays wake, I said. It will drink your grid black. It will sign ephemeral agreements with our implants, and some of you will be touched too deeply by that connection to sleep for days. The cooperative will lose productivity. Your munitions will sweat. A baby will not nap. These are costs. Name them. And we will count. Petrov set the slate to open tally. Citizens shouted what they feared, and we wrote it down. The authorities scoffed. The cult sang under their breath. A woman at the fringe lifted her voice, harrowed and clean. My brother's in Dock 7, she said. He'll run toward the light. He always runs toward the wrong light. Then we will stand on Dock 7, I said, and slow him with tea and the enormous boredom of process. 9 laughed in my ear. You again choose kindness as a weapon, she said. It always feels sharpened when it cuts me first, I answered. We published the tally. We took responsibility for a grid brownout's lost hours at a rate we set to be argued later. We promised a quiet room for those who needed it. We deployed 4 Marines to Dock 7 with a folding table and a kettle. We announced a list of medics who would monitor the sleepless and a roster of neighbors who would trade shifts. When the ledger hit quorum and citizen watchers affixed their names beneath it, I lifted my palm toward the sigil. Mara, 9 whispered, do not be surprised if it does not want you. I will not be surprised if it wants nobody, I whispered back. But I will be grateful if it tells us why. My hand hovered over the glass. It felt like standing at the threshold of a courtroom whose judge might be not just a person, but also a mechanism designed when people still believed in designing mechanisms for mercy. Speak your debt, the hull said. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. No breath, no vocal friction, just the awareness of a sentence in the air's pressure. The cult stilled. The authority shifted. Haru didn't look up. He looked outward, scanning for the moment when those who feared words chose instead to trust hands. We have written it there, I said, and pointed to the slate. We sign our names, and you may sign us as well. When you wake, throttle yourself to half draw on the grid. We will pay the other half in heat we can afford. The glass vein brightened until it became cold fire. Accepted, said the hull. Mirrors cut both ways when they're made of law. The cavern's lights dulled as our grids bled into the ship. The temperature rose, then stabilized at a number we had promised. I watched Administrator Saul watch me as if my shoulders held the weight of her rock, and I understood stewardship for what it always was, an agreement to be the back someone else stands on when the ground shakes. The sigil's inner triangles turned as if on a plane none of us could see. Arrays hummed. The cult sang a low line that didn't fight the hum, but wrote it. The authority captain checked his men to see who flinched. A seam opened like a lid ungluing from lacquer. Inside lay a vestibule lined with panels and text burned into a carbon laminate with the neatness of accountants and poets. The air smelled like old cedar boxes and star coolant. We stepped in with a camera drone that sent back frames in pale blue. frames you felt at the back of your tongue before you saw them. Archivist, I asked softly. I see it. 9 said, It is writing us already. A panel woke near my shoulder with letters that slid into our current script, then settled into a tone both intimate and impersonal. Registry Margin Class 2, it said. Saintship Public Nickname. Rational Name Custodial Archive. Affixed to mobile frame for peer enforcement. Purpose to teach by number and remember by ledger. A miner near the threshold exhaled an oath. The toll captain hissed. That language. Yes, I said. It is older than your tax code and deeper. Then louder. We request identification. Your rational name. Your last docket. Your last steward. The panel flickered, and a low tone pulsed up through the soles of our boots. Some of the cult pressed their palms to the bulkhead as if feeling for a heartbeat. The words shifted. Rational name, auditor of fallen invoices. Last docket, 37 petitions regarding irregular extractions on the zinc step. Last steward Venakasari, who swore to publish her losses and failed. The crowd stirred. I tasted dust. She failed, Haru whispered. How? Maybe like we all fail, I murmured. With reasons that feel like emergencies at the time. The authority captain pushed forward, flanked by 2 men with cutters they did not raise, but wanted to show. Archive, he said, trying the old word like a new blade. We assert immediate custody under emergency ordinance to prevent spiritual contamination and public disorder. Say plainly that you want to lock it behind your gate. Administrator Sal said. I will not argue theology, the captain snapped. Then argue cost, I said. Your ordinance is a net cast wide in storms. Is there a storm? He opened his mouth to say yes, and in that breath, the whole played his last 5 public orders aloud. Clipped and perfect, a 5% skim on oxygen rations to fund a parade, a carve-out that permitted authority men to skip queue at the infirmary, a declaration that salvage belonged temporarily and for the duration to the authority and later to its friends. None of it illegal, all of it selective. Archive, I said. Too softly for the crowd and exactly loud enough for the hull. Who asked you to read him? You can't cheat the mirror if the mirror is a ledger. Petitions exist, and the ship said. When asked to sleep, I listened. When asked to wake, I read. The captain's mouth flattened. His men shifted their attention from me to the ship, the way dogs shift from handler to thunder. Haru's hand settled on my elbow and pressed a thought I already had. The first lawful act of a relic is often to reflect, and reflections wound most where vanity is strongest. Archive, I said. Accept this request. Bind all parties here to one condition. None of us may use your power to harm any other party until a hearing determines a custodian. In exchange, we publish our ledgers of intent and our ledgers of cost. Accepted, the ship said. Somewhere deep, relays rang like temple bells stepping down their harmonics. A spray of frost feathered across the vestibule ceiling and then sublimed, leaving a pattern like lace over black stone. 9 spoke very quietly. It just turned hostile energy back into rule, she said. The authority captain wanted to escalate. He cannot without discounting his entire public voice, because it recorded him and mirrored him with his own consent. That is how civilization survives its champions, I said. On Dock 7, our marine kettle whistled. 2 men argued about whether the tea counted as payment for the ship's attention. A kid asked if she could see the light. A medic told a line of yawning technicians that sleep would come if they stopped scrolling the feed for the 6th time. Civilian life held the perimeter like sandbags hold a river. 9 ran a system scrape. The ship's arrays are charging to an operational minimum. It will not move without a steward, but it can act as a court with our consent." "Everyone's consent?" I asked. "Quorum," she said. "Which you have already built." Clever woman. I learned it from a mind who introduced herself gently. I said, "I learned it." 9 replied, "From 12,000 deaths you refuse to call victories. Count what hurt you, then choose what you'll pay for." The ledger choir approached with their lamp black and their low hum. Their leader bowed, not low, but exact. "Envoy," she said. "We sang for 9 months because we were afraid. We are less afraid now. That means our song must change." "What do you propose?" I asked. "A teaching," she said simply. "One none of us will like." The Toll Authority shifted at the word teaching, the way a soldier shifts when he senses that a speech might prevent a fight he wants to win the easy way. Haru slid his glance across them and then up at the scaffolds where the cooperative had stationed watchers to shame any hand that reached for a tool not named for consent. "Archive," I said. "We request your first act. Teach us the smallest number that can keep us from war." The panel glowed faintly. Numbers formed. They were not the numbers the cult had sung. They were not the numbers the Authority put on their ration posters. They were ratios of heat, attention, and acknowledgement. A calculus of boredom weighted against a calculus of outrage. They were beautiful and hateful. Like the kind of math you only see when you're willing to lose an argument before you win a country. "Publish," I said. Administrator Saul pushed the feed. Miners saw it on their wrist slates and in the corners of their eyes. The Authority saw it and hated the way it ignored credits, and instead counted minutes of listening performed by those with power. The cult saw it and wept because it required them to spend their fervor on other people's pain first. "Archive," the Authority captain said, voice very cold. "This is not law. This is etiquette. Etiquette is law when written by those who think their hands are clean." 9 murmured, and I could hear in her tone that she would argue with me later how far we should let a ship set custom. "Captain," I said aloud, "we will hear your appeal at the hearing today. We will not go to war with a registry." He stared at the ship's sigil. For a moment, I thought he might order cutters. Then a clerk at his elbow coughed gently, fear on his face and a calculation in the corner of his mouth. The captain lowered his chin a fraction, which is all a man says when he has decided to wait and call this dignity. "Because we published the costs, we could afford the courage. We made camp in the vestibule's shadow. The cooperative set out folding chairs. Toll Authority set a perimeter they could later call generosity. The choir sang a new song, one with longer rests. Haru and Sergeant Lika rechecks the fire exit, because no amount of law makes flames kinder. That night cycle, I walked the station's ring and listened to the anchorage breathe. Through thin walls, you hear the practical symphony that makes law worth having samoan mending a sock in long, regular pulls, someone grating starches in a rhythm that fit my footsteps, someone snoring like a sander. The smell of oil and citrus cleaner caught in the throat, and the loam smell of wet hydroponics drifted like a rural memory, impossibly bright in a rock wrapped in machinery. 2 kids had found chalk and were drawing the ship on a bulkhead panel. Their lines made the sigil too sharp, too pointy. I crouched beside them and smudged an angle. "It's softer here," I said. Why, one asked, so it can flex when you're not looking. I said, "The hardest laws bend only once." Their mother thanked me with her eyes and not her mouth. Some gratitude lives longer when you do not name it. We had our first escalation at third bell. A set of private skiffs bearing the mark of the Karen Syndicate slid in along the sunward slot, tight to the rock, their profiles shivering with ECM. Haru saw them first on a passive peak that smelled like static and old copper. Karen, he said, and there was a weary affection in it the way a farmer says fox. They'll claim to be mediators, Petrov muttered. Then they'll try to throw us a rope woven of debt we can't pay. Nine did not sigh, but she took on the tone of someone who adjusted the music in a room before any guest noticed it had gone sour. They prefer feints, Mira, and they have files on each of us. I prefer light, I said. Saul. The administrator put the ring on loudspeaker and spoke in the voice you use with neighbors whose names you do not want to remember. Karen Kraft. Declare your cargo and your purpose. You are under contest. You are welcome to argue and forbidden to pry. Their reply came silk soft and menacing, only if you had ever been strangled by silk. Administrator. We bring a custodial convoy and 3 bonded arbiters. Our goal is calm. Your goal is always the same, I said on the open channel. To own the calm. We will not trade a saintship for a quiet that isn't ours. The Karen ships hesitated. The listening quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was a space crowded with men making eye contact with others and deciding whether to play the old script. 9 fed me thread. The Karen had 2 options: land with smiles and bribes, or arrive with lawsuits, serve like knives. Archive, I said, teach us a small law. The panel wrote 4 lines, nothing more. Distrust those who take your silence for consent. Distrust those who mistake your consent for silence. Publish your yes louder than your no when you can. Publish your no louder than your fear when you must. Administrator, I asked. She smiled a small, sharp smile. Stationed to Karen, we consent to the presence of those who commit to our ledgers. Repeat sign, or spin. The Karen ships held. The authority captain's lips thinned, seeing power slip out of the old channels where he knew where to push. The choir hummed. Haru's Marines leaned just enough to make clear that their safety lines were tight, their boredom well armed. The Karen turned their vector 2 degrees and idled in the shadow of the anchorage's outer vanes. Not a retreat, a wait. When the world would not bend, they would look for a seam. I lay down on a foam mat near the vestibule's threshold and pretended to sleep. 9 counted my breaths and matched them for 5 cycles, then whispered, You are not tired at all. I am tired of being the only adult in a room where everyone is old, I said. 9's laugh was a soft tick in my bone. You are not the only adult. You are just the adult who knows the ledger wants blood and is offering it tea. Will tea be enough? I asked. Tea never is, 9 said. But it confuses the knives. At first light, the anchorage's hydroponics pipes knocked like someone knocking on a door with the back of their knuckles. That is an ordinary sound, which is why it calms the hands that grip rifles. We use that calm to convene. The authority, the choir, the cooperative, a Karen representative who had signed the ledger reluctantly and with an expression like chewing nettles. And us. First hearing. Petrov announced. On the matter of interim custodian and the scope of custody. We petition for custodianship under the interstices precedent, I said. We propose a steward council composed of 1 from each party present, bound by the archive's small laws and by a veto tied to cost publication. The authority captain made a face like tasting toothpaste he did not order. We petition for standard salvage leadership under emergency ordinance. The emergency is boredom, the Karen representative said sweetly. We petition a bonded custodian from our neutral list. The choir asked the ship to teach a form. The panel produced a grid, 3 columns labeled Intent, Cost, Publishing, under them, Numbers. Thresholds tied to quorum and to burdens on those least able to bear them. The grid wasn't a cage. It was a fence low enough to invite vaulting and high enough to hurt knees. We argued. The air thickened with voices. Civilians drifted near and then away, bored, hungry, curious again. Their presence like a tide that shamed us into short sentences and plain words. In the pauses, you heard trickles coolant, coffee, gossip. 9 whispered arguments into my ear and argued with herself while she did it. This formula weights the choir song too heavily, she said. It discounts that the authority can enforce cost publication by making people too tired to sign. Counterweight with time. I murmured, give authority a first word and other parties the last. We will lose momentum, she said. We will gain consent, I said. She considered. You are not a soldier the way we designed them, she said. You are an accountant with a spear. If I must stare down a god, I said, let it be a god of numbers. Mirrors are mercy when they show you what you owe next. At third pause, the Karen made their move. Not with suits or guns. With a rumor. A miner sprinted in, face white around the eyes, and shouted that the archive had killed a child. You feel lies in the body before you hear them with the ears. A limpness at the spine. Heat under the nails. A wrongness that tastes like soap. Haru's Marines shifted to interpose. The crowd rippled. The authority captain's gaze lit like a man who had just found a coin under a saint's foot. The choir broke into a loud, discordant hum to hold attention. Stop, I said to the room, and then to the miner. Where? Dock 7. He gasped. Leica Haru snapped. Table's still up, Leica said on comms. Tea's hot. The girl is asleep by the kettle. We're reading a spoof. Somebody injected a false alert into the private channel. 9 ran the path backward like a spider running silk. Karen's subcarrier, she murmured. Shallow. Plausible. Cheap. Archive, I said. First lawful act, turn their hostile logic back. Panels across the vestibule lit like windows in a city block at dusk. The numbers the Karen had been shunting into the rumor pool reappeared, tagged with their signatures, then rearranged themselves into a bill. The bill's title was calm and devastating. Costs of attempted contagion. The Karen representative choked on his tongue. Administrator Saul tapped the publish key with a small flourish and sent the bill to every slate on the rock. We've all been stupid and mean, she said to the room. But you tried to be clever and mean. Clever and mean costs triple until you remember that clever is a tool and mean is a theft. The Karen ship spun a degree outward, heat signatures climbing, engines whispering frustration. The authority captain looked ill, like a man who had planned to wield a riot and was forced to hold a spoon. We resumed the hearing with fewer adjectives. By last bell, we had an interim steward council and an agreement to count sleep lost as cost. Weighted highly, the archive signed it by letting its sigil glow and cooling one bank of arrays so softly the air smelled briefly of frost and cedar again. The first entries in the common ledger blinked once, like eyes waking from a nap they had permission to take. We were still early in the spiral when the syndicate escalated again. A cloaked tug broke free of their cluster and made a burn toward the anchorage's underside, where the rock's geometry made bubbles of radar quiet. Haru swore in a tone of polite resignation and pointed, and our escort drone fired a warning pattern that spelled, move like you're brave, die like you're a fool, in the code of men who watch too many war recordings. They'll try to anchor a tow, 9 said. If they lock a line to the hull, we'll bleed this rock to keep them off. I said, "Cost," she murmured. "Count it," I said. "Count first. Bleed last." We spun up decoys, hot spikes that drifted like bait. The tug's captain ignored them. He'd seen this game. He wanted the hull's seam. Lika's Marines clipped lines across the vestibule mouth and braced behind them with calm faces and soft voices. The choir matched their hum to the archive's grid frequencies, which is to say, they guessed and were lucky. "Archive," I said, keeping my voice even. "Teach a rule that preserves both our hands." A single sentence appeared. "A Tau is a contract. Do not honor a contract signed with your skin." I smiled. Drone. Locked to the tug's Tau line bay with a magnetic gate and broadcast that line. Any line will count as a signature, forfeiting 3 times their fuel mass to the cooperative's trust. "That's not law," the authority captain snapped. "It is offer and acceptance," Petrov said mildly. "Watch and learn." The tug's pilot hesitated. He could pull a line and risk a bill his bosses would hate to pay, or he could back out and drink the shame. Haru traced the tug's nose with a lazy threat vector. The pilot backed out. Civilized men hate to be witnesses to the making of shame. It makes them feel complicit. The tug's heat profile cooled a fraction, enough for everyone to breathe again. 9 whispered, "You could have ordered a shot. I could pour blood into a ledger," I said. "Or I can pour patience. It adds up," she said. "It better," I whispered, "because patience is harder to borrow." We slept in shifts. Our kettles hissed. The anchorage's pipes banged again, like knuckles. Civilians told jokes that started with "a saintship," "an authority," and a cultist walk into a bar and never got to the punchline because someone always left to take a watch. In the morning, Administrator Sal brought me a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt hope, and I drank it like sacrament. At the 3rd day's midpoint, the archive asked a question without preamble. The panel lit, "Who will bear the first loss in public?" It is a cruel and honest question, the kind that sorts councils into people who love the word "we" because it hides how they mean you. The choir looked at me. The authority looked away. The Karen rep stared at his slate and pretended not to be alive. "I will," I said. 9 did not speak. Haru swore softly. Petrov did not move. "Publish your loss," the ship said. I put my name beside the ledger of harms again and added, "If these acts lead to conflict outside this rock that draws in the Coast of Law's resources, I will surrender command of this mission to the Steward Council. I will accept censure. I will step aside from the next case and the one after." Administrator Saul read it and blinked. "That's blood," she said. "That's a sacrifice you can measure," I said. "The only kind that teaches. Teach by spending what you cannot fake, so." The room settled around. That like concrete poured around a post. The authority captain breathed out the air he'd been saving for a dramatic objection. The choir sang a single note that sounded like a hand leaving a cheek after a long, gentle touch. The Karen rep swallowed hard and put his own line on the ledger. "If the Karen Syndicate attempts a tow under my watch, I resign my bond." It was a hedge. It was not courage. It was a start. We were not saints. We were tired and irritable, and righteousness tastes worse than coffee on a 3rd morning. The archive approved what it could approve and withheld what it could not. And when it withheld, it wrote a sentence for each denial that did not shame but required. The room learned slowly. I learned slower than I wanted and faster than I feared. Dawn feels different in an asteroid. It's not light. It's the schedule aligning with what your hunger wants. On the 4th dawn schedule, A new threat arrived without herald, a fleetlet of legalists from the line's central docket. Glossy ships with glossy arguments. They had names like Splendid Precedent and Abiding Fee. They sent documents as weapons and smiled in the tone of those who have never been poor in the coin they count. Petrov said, the priests of paperwork, they will hate the archive. 9 said, not because it breaks their law, but because it remembers the parts they skim. We met them in the vestibule because I wanted them to feel the sigil hum under their shoes. They began with compliments. They moved to scolds. They offered a hearing in a place far from this rock with a docket stretched long enough to wear us out. The authority captain warmed to them like a man who finds a coat he wore when he was young. Gentlemen, I said, and the word was both accurate and surgical. You bring knives made of calendar. We will not lie down to be cut by boredom. They bristled. One said, you have no right to convene here. The archive gave us quorum, Administrator Sal said, and we gave it cost. You can't bargain with a registry. Another scoffed. Yeah, I said, we can only publish with one. Mirror us, and we'll become what we claim to be. They filed a motion anyway, which, in their vocabulary, meant broadcast a threat disguised as a lullaby. The archive received it, wrote a single question at the bottom, and presented it back. Who pays for the distance? They couldn't answer without exposing their habit fees that multiply when poor people travel. Their faces said it the way men's faces say it when a machine we built to keep us honest refuses to let us lie the old, easy way. We settled on a hearing here, under the sigil, with the grid held by both parties' ledgers. We ended that session alive. We ended it broke in the coin of attention and rich in the coin of precedent. The Karen tug crept away like a fox deciding chickens who could count weren't worth the neck. The authority captain sat very still and looked at his hands as if considering whether, under the right light, they looked clean. The choir slept with their heads on each other's shoulders and snored in harmony. When I could no longer pretend I didn't ache, I walked to the vestibule alone. The panel woke without a touch, reading my pulse in the air. Rational name, it said. And then, do you wish to know why your predecessor failed? I had not asked. I had only thought. Yes. I said, no will holds without witnesses. It wrote. She refused to let anyone see her make a mistake. Her losses grew in secret until they owned her. I will make mine loudly, I said. I reached out and laid my palm near the sigil, and in that closeness, I thought of all the times strength had meant closing a hand and calling that closing virtue. The ship's hum matched my breath. My reflection in the lacquered black was not flattering. It was honest. Archivist, I whispered. Yes, Mara, do you think we can hold this without it breaking us? No, she said softly. I think it will break us and make us again, or it will break us and leave us in pieces. I think the difference will be whether we publish. Then we publish, I said. In the panel's corner, a new ledger entry blinked once as it posted to the common feed. The air smelled again of cedar and frost as a bank of arrays cooled. Like a sigh, permitted and completed, I spoke quietly to the hull, knowing my voice was now a line in its accounts and an echo in 1,000 sleepers' dreams. When I was 12, I said, my mother taught me to keep grocery receipts in a jar on the counter. She called it the jar of promises, because every slip in it was a meal we had paid forward into our own tomorrow. I thought it was small. I learned later it was a reliquary. The sigil brightened until it seemed my hand would lose its shadow. If we make you a reliquary, I said, we will not pray. We will count. The panel's text softened, as if a hand had smudged chalk into a warmer shape. Agreed. It wrote. Then come count with me. My reply was more breath than word, spoke in someone else's holy space and claimed as ours. We will, and because some promises ring best as plain declarations. I turned to the sleeping vestibule and the waking rock and spoke a compact truth meant for all who would hear. We will be stewards, not owners. We will publish costs before victories. We will accept that a ledger can forgive and still refuse to forget. The sigil glowed like a scale lit from within. A new entry blinked on the common ledger, and the archive's arrays exhaled a cooling breath. We do not deserve this ship. We will never deserve it. That's not the point. Deserving is a story the greedy tell so they can sleep. Stewardship is how the tired stand and keep standing. If we fail, we will fail loudly with numbers in our hands and neighbors at our sides. If we succeed, it will not look like triumph. It will look like a line of names under a cost we agreed to pay, and a door that opens because we taught ourselves to ask the right question before we asked for the key. We teach, we reflect, we remember, and we count. The hearing opened with the static taste of recycled air and the soft patter of drips from a sweating coolant loop, the kind of small leak everyone swears they'll fix after the big thing ends. The legalists arranged their tablets like a priest sets out relics. The authority captain wore a pen with the line's crest, a bit of theater to imply he wrote history while we merely read it. The choir stood with their hands clasped as if to hold down their own hearts. I felt the sigil behind me like a gaze. Your voice matters most when you use it second. We began with jurisdiction. They pressed us with codes that could choke a pipeline. Petrov answered with our published ledger and the archive's small laws. The legalists shifted tactics when they realized threadbare righteousness wouldn't unravel our quorum. They moved to evidence. We gave them raw footage of the opening. The Doc T, the Karen rumor, the tug's partial burn. Their brows tightened when they understood we were not hoarding strong moments for drama. We were spending them like currency. Each receipt clipped to a name. Who holds physical custody of the mobile frame when asked? No one, I said. That is the cost we've accepted. The trust binds usage without a hand on a throttle. Then your control is fiction, he snapped. Like the faith that a stop sign holds a truck, I said. And yet, somehow, people stop, mirror a man's certainty back at him, and he wonders who's speaking. The authority captain tried his appeal then, because it was the best moment he would get. He spoke of disorder, of spiritual contagion, of the need for a single voice in a storm. He almost convinced himself when he said it. The archive did not interrupt. It wrote one sentence in the panel's corner, so small only those close to the sigil saw it. One voice is quiet until it publishes who taught it. We adjourned for 6 hours to let tired people become kinder. The ring smelled of onions and hot plastic. Children made drumming games on cargo crates. A Karen tech tried to sell a miner a used thermal wrench and received, in exchange, a lecture on how prices aren't numbers. Their stories tied to who can walk away. Haru checked the fire doors again and touched my elbow when my temper got ahead of my breath. Your face is too open, he murmured. So is our ledger, I said. Let them read me. We were 2 hours into adjournment when the first real blow landed. Not words. Heat. A spike so clean it had to be manufactured by someone who knew how much pain you could fit into 3 degrees. Hydroponics crippled. Propellant tanks sweating like nervous men. The choir stopped singing mid-syllable. I watched the station's power board stutter and thought how often sabotage wears the clothes of accident. Trace, I said, 9 did not answer for a half count, which is how I knew she was already there. Karen ghosted their signature behind a legalist courier's thruster bleed. She said, "Elegant. We can prove it in 20 minutes. Or stop it in 2. 2. I said, "We'll prove it after. Count your losses quickly so you can save what's left." We bled the archive's arrays to feed the ring, a choice that tasted like pride ground to paste and spread thin on ration bread. The sigil dimmed a shade. The air cooled, but the margin we had promised the ship shrank measurably. I read the number and felt, in the bones of men who have counted famine, how quickly abundance becomes arrogance until a ledger nudges your ribs and reminds you breath is borrowed. "Publish," I said. Petrov pushed the cost report to every slate. 2 hours of array draw surrendered. Hydroponic shock absorbed by volunteer crews. Authority security redirected to carry water and mop condensation. The Authority captain stiffened, then surprised me by rolling his sleeves. "Give me a mop," he said. Perhaps he saw the headlines. Perhaps he felt the mirror. 9 found the heat spike's knotted signature and untied it with the grace of someone who had taught younger minds to stop lying to themselves. The trace pointed not to the legalists, but to Karen's fox, the tug pilot's boss, a woman whose ships wore ethics like perfume. "Call her," I said. "We put her on the public feed." Her smile was milk-sweet and clever. "Administrator knows," she cooed. "Your leaks wouldn't be so dangerous if you had proper maintenance. We could help for a fee." "You already charged us," Sol said. Surprisingly gentle. "You just used heat instead of credits." The archive wrote a bill, heat paid by many for gain by few. It attached Karen's signature and 3 of their proxies. It itemized by the minute. It included sleep lost. It included spoiled lettuce. It included a child's fever that rose 1 notch when the air grew close. "Refute it," I said to Karen. She tried. Her words skidded off the ledger like rain on oil. She cut the connection when she realized numbers do not fear power so long as they're published before the door locks. Teach the room that time is a coin and watch who hoards it. The legalist returned looking angrier and more polished, which is their version of armored. They proposed an injunction against publication without their approval. The archive printed a question in neat block text. WSHU pays for the delay. They argued that truth is fragile and must be handled by experts. Administrator Saul, hair damp from mopping, said, "Truth is patient. It can survive daylight. It cannot survive molasses." Their eyebrows climbed so far they practically recused themselves from their own foreheads. We moved to the crux custodianship and doctrine. The choir asked the archive to speak to worthiness. The panel rendered a test I loved instantly and hated simultaneously. 10 names. It wrote, 10 losses you will make public before you hold a key. The authority captain bristled, then shocked me by stepping forward. He named the oxygen skim, the infirmary carve-out, the salvage language that drifted like fog into theft. He named 2 petty embezzlements he could have hidden. He named a bribe he didn't take and a temptation he did. He named a riot he almost engineered because boredom wears uniforms too. When he finished, his eyes had the careful brightness of a man who has burned himself and is pretending it doesn't sting. Keys are not forgiveness, the archive wrote. Keys are responsibility. The choir's lamp-black leader named her fervor's injuries a boy she shamed for mocking their counting, a song she kept pure rather than changing when number changed, a hunger she stoked because it felt holy. She cried and kept going. The room's breath synced with hers because crying in public is harder than bleeding. I named mine, a treaty I sabotaged to secure a smaller win because a bigger one scared me, a junior I dismissed when she needed a teacher, a raid I led when a hearing would have worked, and the 9 men who woke screaming for months after. My voice didn't wobble. The wobble comes later in a bunk, under a foil blanket, when a ship's gentle hum feels like mercy and judgment both. Mirror yourself before the room does, or risk hating the glass. We passed the test. The archive produced 5 token keys, not physical things, but authorizations that bound to our names with constraints we had written ourselves. I felt mine settle like a weight on my ribs and an empty space under it where something dangerous might someday try to live. 9 went quiet for a moment, so private I almost looked for her in a corner. "I am proud and afraid," she said. "I want to hold the keys. I want you to hold them. I want to hold you while you hold them. And I do not know which want is safest." "Hold the ledger," I said. "Make me publish when I flinch." "Always," she said. We had barely strapped the new responsibilities to our fronts when the system changed. A signal moved through the anchorage's bedrock and out into the belt. The kind of pulse miners feel in their teeth and birds feel in their bones if there are birds in vacuum. Old architecture woke beacon pylons seated in the zinc step when men still believed they could draw boundaries with sculpture. The archive hummed like kettles, and the sigil's inner triangles shifted in ways that made the legalists sweat. "What's it calling?" Haru asked. "Witnesses," 9 said. "Peers." There were 6 registries in this cluster. 3 died. 2 are missing. 1 hears. We all heard it then. A return call in a frequency that made muscle feel like water. Not music. Reckoning. The choir fell into a counterhum that stabilized our stomachs. The authority captain leaned on a rail. Suddenly small. The Karen ships edged outward again, reluctant to be present when their games became visible. "Location," I said. 9 lit a map in my eye, a derelict pulsar yard, where once they skinned stellar wind for charge and carved doctrine into spinning wire. The yard's frame had cut ships like paper when it collapsed. Its skeleton turned still in a thin halo of dust. The archive wrote 2 lines. "Request joint expedition. Condition publish doctrine in travel. Count the costs before you spin the wheel." We built the convoy like a braided rope cooperative haulers with welding kits. Choir barges with loudspeakers turned modest. Authority cutters with guns unloaded and safeties taped in the open position. Our shuttle with its old resin smell, and Charon's tug, permitted under the condition that every vector they burn would be logged as a promise in public. The legalists sent 2 ships with names like civics lessons. They carried stenographers and doubt. We launched on a low burn to keep heat margins snug. Stars crisped in our canopy like salt on dark bread. The anchorage shrank into an idea behind us, supported by signs on walls that said where exits were, and by neighbors who had gotten used to the taste of shared work. I watched men nap with mouths open and hands unclenched. I watched lamps flicker like tired eyes that still refused to close. 2 hours out, the Charon tug attempted a sidle into the convoy's blind angle. Haru tagged it with a laser that wrote a contract in light on their hull. This distance, on consent to be counted. They drifted back, grumpy. The choir broadcast a poem about foxes who wear sheep as coats and forget their tails. We approached the yard on a vector that let dust whisper along our hulls in silky threads. The pulsar itself thrummed beyond, a heartbeat too slow to dance to and too fast to sleep to. The yard's frame loomed like lace spun from iron and regret. In its center, a shape not black, not white, something that felt like an answer before a question, another registry. old as numbers, quiet as a courtroom between sentences. Archivist, I asked. I hear it, she said, and it hears the bills we carry. The yard reached toward us with an electromagnetic flick of an old habit. Our screens crawled with code, a challenge in a logic that once sorted pirates from petitioners. The archive answered with our ledger. The other ship considered, then wrote its own condition in an ancient script, 9 translated on the fly. A saintship does not bend the knee to a crown. It wrote. It bends to a list. Teach the ancient that we still know how to count. We sent it our list costs published. Sleeps recorded. Mops raised. Rumors priced at triple. The yard's registry brightened until the rim of the frame glowed dull cherry. It let us approach on a lane wide enough to contain our fear without scraping it off on steel. Then the trap sprouted teeth, not from the registry, from men. Karen had another tug tucked behind a broken vein, cloaked in debris. It burned at the last moment, aiming to throw a toe on the old ship while we were busy convincing history to hug us. The authority captain shouted orders he had no right to give, and then stopped, remembering who he had promised to be. The legalists swore. The choir sang so loud the hull vibrated. Nine's voice did not rise. Mara, she said. Extent of law. Planetary. I said. Interstice. Higher. She said. System scale. The yard's field is wired to mirrors. I saw it reflector arrays meant to shape pulsar wash into a manageable glow. They could be rephased. They could throw a towel line back as heat and invoice. Archive, I said. Already moving. First gambit at scale. Mirror their energy as DEET. Panels across our cockpit lit with options. Shaped as diagrams, a miner could love angles and times. Heat budgets annotated with notes that didn't lie. We selected the path that hurt us a little and hurt them a lot. Which is how fairness feels when you are the one who brought knives. Haru's hands were clean and quick on the controls. The mirrors rolled like a slow blink. The Karen line shot out, bright with greedy faith. The yard returned it as a sigh of heat that kissed their hull, counted the kiss as cost, and billed them in reactant. They could have cut away. They didn't. Pride is the tether you can't eject. Their engine faltered. Our grid dipped. The legalists grabbed seats. The choir sang at a lower frequency to keep bile where it belonged. The authority captain closed his eyes and whispered a name that might have been his own. The Karen tug's burn went ragged. They drifted into a vein and scraped paint and ego. No deaths. A bounced hull. A deadline item ticking while the pilot fought his own temper. We published the damage to ourselves, a raise overheated by 1 degree, more than promised. 2 Marines with split lips from biting at the wrong moment. 1 choir singer hoarse. The archive wrote our losses in the corner, like a reminder you put on your own refrigerator. Remember to restock mercy. Mirror theft back as math, and watch it turn small. The yard's registry welcomed us then. The way an old teacher welcomes a student who shows up with homework completed and questions written neatly. Its panels spoke in facets of a voice, like a choir that refused to harmonize until the downbeat. Rational name, keeper of loose bonds. It said, last docket 20 petitions regarding lost wages on the dust ring. Last steward none for 840 years. We docked by not docking. We held alongside and let its field tug us gentle. The air in our cabin tasted of cold iron and lemon. A trick of memory my mother's counters taught me: clean something, then call it holy to hold yourself accountable for the next mess. Keeper, I said, we request counsel between registries. We bring a doctrine that stewards by ledgers, not by collars. Doctrine received. It wrote, "Doctrine tested." The test was a simulation, not lasers, a case study broadcast into our minds, not a jury box. It showed us a colony with a saintship twitch to despots. It showed us a revolution that cut a chain and forged another. It showed us a ledger that grew private and then grew quiet and then grew fat. It asked us to fix it, not with bullets, but with numbers and hands. The choir sang numbers. The authority arranged cues. The legalists wrote a hearing schedule that would have taken 3 years and then slashed it to 3 months under public glare. Karen offered logistics and, astonishingly, wrote down a fee that made sense. Petrov adjusted the weights on sleep again, higher. The archive and the keeper combined their small laws into one that refused to let anyone rest on someone else's fatigue. We passed. The registries hummed in a chord that felt like passing a test you feared would reveal you as a child. The keeper wrote a sentence that would become a prayer in some mouths and a policy in others. A saintship teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. I felt something unwind in my chest then. Not relief. A knot of wanting to win that finally remembered wanting to serve. 9 breathed with me like she was barring my lungs to feel human for 5 seconds. Count the living before you name your victories. We rethreaded the convoy for return. The Karen tugs kept station. Pride abraded thin enough to let light through. The legalists drafted precedent and asked the archive to co-sign with a clause that forced any court to publish the costs of rescheduling. The authority captain filed a report that made him look worse and everyone else look honest, which is a kind of courage we need to practice more if we plan to keep breathing. Halfway home, the last loss demanded payment. The heat margin we'd surrendered earlier came due. A coolant pump on our shuttle coughed once and died like a small animal held too long. We had redundancy. We did not have comfort. The cabin grew close. The resin smell sharpened. Sweat collected at the back of my knee and refused to evaporate. Leisha cracked a joke so bad we had to laugh or break. Cost? 9 said quietly. "We'll pay in boredom," I said. 4 hours of stories. No one sleeps alone. No one reads a slate. We told each other small truths so we wouldn't think about big heat. Haru talked about failing his first exam because he tried to answer like a hero instead of like a clerk. Lika told us the sound of rain on tin roofs in the world that raised her. Petrov admitted he loved cooking stews more than winning arguments because stews forgive. The authority captain confessed he liked mopping. The room loosened like a cramped hand. When the anchorage's spinner rings came back into view, I felt the way you feel coming home from a hard day at court when you're sure you didn't lose and terrified you didn't win, and finally accepting that neither word applies to stewardship. We docked. The rocks smelled like it remembered us. The hydroponics breathed green. The sigil on the vestibule glowed at a brightness that said welcome. Also work. We convened under it to write the precedent. The legalists tried to turn it into a poem. Petrov turned it back into a contract. Administrator Sal insisted we add a clause about mops because names matter when you want to keep something alive. The choir wrote a preface that wasn't a prayer, but could be sung if grief needed melody. The archive and the keeper co-signed in a notation that translated, "in plain speech," to an agreement you could carry in a pocket and read to a neighbor when tempers rise. Ledger of Stewardship. We titled it. Its first lines were simple. Any relic that wakes within polity or interstice shall bind itself to a public ledger of costs before exercising power. Any steward shall publish their first 10 losses before holding a key. Any hearing shall be held as close as possible to those affected. with the cost of distance paid by those asking others to travel. Any attempt to mirror power as rumor shall be priced triple. Any tow unconsented shall be counted as a contract with forfeit set by quorum. It wasn't perfect. It was good enough to make bad men stall and good people hurry. Mirror the doctrine into tomorrow until today looks honest. We read it aloud. Civilians listened with the casual intensity of people judging whether a rule will make them late for dinner. The Karen rep grimaced at the forfeit clause and signed anyway. The authority captain signed without theatrics. The legalists signed with elaborate flourishes that would look pretty on a plaque and did not, for once, make the words worse. Now comes the hard part. 9 said in my ear, being the kind of people who keep reading this when it's inconvenient. We'll make it loud. I said, so we can't pretend we didn't hear. After signatures, the choir asked for a moment to sing gratitude that didn't taste like victory. They sang about mops and kettles and coolant loops. They sang about the mothers who hung receipts in jars and the fathers who taught boys to hold back when a tool could do a job better than a fist. They sang about saints who were ships and ships who were teachers. It wasn't pretty. It was true. On Dock 7, a girl woke from her nap and asked for tea. We posted the doctrine to the common feed. The archive pulsed its sigil once, then settled with the contentment of a furnace set to a temperature that won't warp a pan. The keeper, far out in the yard, acknowledged with a single bright ping that made the hair on my arms lift. 9 was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, I heard, for the first time, fatigue in her algorithm. I want to rest, she said. Not to sleep, to rest, like the arrays when they cool and smell faintly of cedar. You have earned it, I said. We all have. I will rest later, she said. One more act. The panel lit with the sentence addressed to me alone. Who will write the first entry under precedent? Me, I said. I stood before the sigil and spoke to the rock. The smell of oil, onions, and ozone wrapped around me like a blanket borrowed from a neighbor who trusts me to return it. Haru stood at my shoulder, Lika at my other. Petrov a step back with his slate. The authority captain looked at his hands like examining new tools. The choir's lamp-black leader wiped her cheeks and put on a stern mouth for listening. My name is Mara Ellison. I said, I accept stewardship for one cycle under the ledger of stewardship. I publish this cost. I am tired and afraid. And I could become cruel if praised too often. I publish this promise. I will refuse praise I haven't paid for with work. And I will refuse work that is really vanity. I publish this loss. I wanted to own this ship. I will not. Count me with the rest, even when I stand in front. The sigil brightened. A new entry blinked on the common ledger. Steward cycle begun. The arrays exhaled a cooling breath like relief. The room didn't cheer. The room nodded, which is the sound honest rooms make. I thought it would end there, with signatures and nods. But history likes afterbeats, the way a song likes one last strum to make sure the vibration has somewhere to go. Karen tried one last trick, smaller and pettier than their heat spike and therefore more dangerous. They approached the mother of the girl from Dock 7 and offered her a contract. We'll pay you to say the archive frightened your child. It was an ugly, quiet thing. It almost worked. She told us. We published the offer. We priced it at shame ×3. The Karen rep resigned his bond as promised and left the rock without forcing us to enforce. I walked the ring that night and saw, on 4 different doors, copies of the doctrine taped crooked with the kind of tape you use when you meant to make it temporary and leave it there forever. The legalists prepared to leave. One lingered. "Envoy," she said, "you could have taken more." "I could have." I said, "I would have needed more naps." She smiled despite herself. "I will argue with you again." "Please," I said, "nay, bring receipts." The anchorage returned to a new ordinary. Hydroponics smelled sweeter after crisis. The coolant loop sang less, like a throated song that had learned to purr. Children drew the sigil with softer corners. Haru found a leak in a fire door and fixed it without telling anyone because some victories are better hidden in safety. Lika hosted a stew night and made us name our worst decisions before we got seconds. Petrov drafted a guide to small laws that a teenager could read and a bureaucrat could hate. I sat under the sigil and wrote the last entries of my first steward cycle. The numbers were plain. The names were many. The losses were honest and therefore light enough to carry. I finished and leaned my head against the cool panel and thought of my mother's jar. I did not know if we would hold this for a year, or a decade, or long enough to forget how cold the arrays smelled when they cooled. I knew we had made a precedent, not a monument. Monuments make men proud. Precedents make them careful. I wanted careful more than I wanted proud. The panel warmed under my skin. The archive spoke softly, the way rain talks to tin. "Mara." "Yes. You asked me once whether we can hold this without it breaking us. I did. It will break us," she said, "and we will publish the crack, and the room will bring tape, and then better tape, and then bolts. That is how ships become cities." I closed my eyes. I heard Detroit stew pots and pulsar yards. I smelled cedar and frost. I felt, under my hand, a scale lit from within. The sigil brightened like a heart accepting a burden. A new entry blinked on the common ledger, precedent published. The arrays exhaled, cooling with a whisper you felt in your teeth. I spoke the end quietly, the way you talk to a friend who is finally sleeping. We are undeserving, and we will never finish paying. That is not the point. We will carry a list instead of a collar, a mop instead of a banner, a ledger instead of a hymn. We will win by receipts and lose in public and still come home to stew. If we fail, the bill will be clear, and our neighbors will know where to send help. If we succeed, it will look like a scale that stays level because 1,000 hands are on it, adjusting gently. We will teach, we will mirror, we will ledger, and we will count.